Thank you. Can I call John Finnie to be followed by Ian Gray? John Finnie.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer, and I think it's been an interesting debate, and as ever there's been lots of requests for additional detail. I'd like to start by commending a number of elements that's included in the programme for government. First and foremost, one I don't think anyone else has mentioned, and that's the £2 million additional money for the Gypsy Traveller community. And I'd like to commend the Minister, Kevin Stewart. I think there's been really significant movement and engagement with the traveller community who have been impressed with that, so I welcome that. I also welcome the policy of the Young Carer Grant, which is a green policy being brought forward. And as my colleague Mark Ruskell talked about the Heat Networks Bill, perhaps unfortunately the focus appears to be on regulation rather than transformational change, because that transformational change can be significant, as is the case in Amsterdam, 100,000 houses and 8,000 a year. The Good Food Nation Bill, now the original tension of that bill, and thank goodness it's here, the original vision was of a cross-portfolio legislation and improving access to healthy, affordable food, bringing food into health, environment and social justice agendas, indeed the right to food. And I did see someone say in relation to that, let's hope it's not a watered-down marketing ploy. Clearly procurement, and that was mentioned by someone else, needs to be sorted, and the idea of lorries driving past food producers to deliver processed foods to our schools hopefully can be addressed. Quite some distance travelled in a few months since this chamber voted down the Scottish Green Party's declaration of a climate emergency, but that's welcome. The STUC responded to the programme for government by saying, and I quote here, the current market approach to decarbonisation has failed. And I think that's a very valid position. And we know that all the other parties in this chamber here have positively extolled the UK government to give ever-increasing additional tax breaks to obscenely wealthy oil and gas sector, who today were celebrating the increase in the drilling activity. Apparently more wells drilled in the first 7 months of this year than in the whole of last year. And they go on to argue that maximum extraction must continue and is compatible with net zero thanks to carbon capture and storage. Not quite how we see things, I have to say. And as the STUC also went on to say, to be worthy of the name Green New Deal, there needs to consider the role of publicly owned energy, transport and construction companies. And words are very important. My colleague Mark Ruskell talked, in fact he said he welcomed the Scottish Government's adoption of the language of the Green New Deal, adding that the programme is not a Green New Deal. Transition away from oil and gas by reducing the demand and supply in tandem, as the New Zealand government are planning for, is the way ahead. So, as ever, we see a modest incremental change dressed up in grand rhetoric. The Scottish Green New Deal is different, publicly owned national bank and energy company. A New Deal should be a transformational programme of building the public sector and redirecting massive investment into infrastructure. And the programme for government is a long way from the bold and transformative change we need and want to see a commitment from the government to work with us to try and embolden the approach that's been taken. Now, a lot's been made of the quoted sum of £100 million improved bus priority infrastructure. And clearly that's one area where we would welcome a lot more detail. I know Mr Neil talked about some of the implications for that. It's to apparently tackle the impacts of congestion on bus services and raise bus usage. Where's that money coming from? How is it going to raise patronage out with areas with priority infrastructure? What's it going to do for residents in remote and rural areas? The reality is it's not going to make buses any more affordable or accessible to people. And the Scottish Government has failed to address the decline in bus usage by expanding the concessionary travel scheme. Now, the Scottish Green Party advocate fully free bus services. And it's perhaps disappointing, reassuring that there's some thought going into it, but failing to take even the modest step of introducing free transport for under 26 is disappointing. Trying to work out how that infrastructure money might be spent. If you take, for instance, the City of Inverness, which has modest bus prioritisation, but a council that positively encourages the public to drive into a city centre where there already is poor quality and notwithstanding environmental impact assessment. It shows that there needs to be coordination not only of local policy, but the coordination between national and local policy. We need local transport strategies, and that's a key element of the workplace parking levy that would dovetail with national strategy. So what is the Scottish Government strategy in relation to transport? It is to continue, not slow, let alone abandon, the £6 billion expenditure on 2 roads in the north. Now, what they need to do, what the government need to do is re-examine all its existing policies. Page 92 says, embed sustainable travel principles. Well, there's a dearth of that apparent. Now, as to the mode of propulsion of a vehicle, of course, it doesn't matter what propels it. Congestion is caused by vehicles, so whether it's diesel, petrol, electricity, we need a situation where the government needs to set traffic reduction targets. I mentioned earlier about publicly owned, the requirement for public ownership. That needs to be of our bus services, absolutely needs to be of our bus services, our rail services and our ferry services. And that could lead to better integration. And we are a maritime nation. We have a growing and ageing fleet. We have the issue of 2 ferries at the moment. We have a lot of ferries to replace. The provision of that can't be left to the private sector. And as I did yesterday, I would urge the Scottish Government to nationalise Ferguson's Yard. In the short time I have left, there's a lack of ambition here. Where's the mobilisation of the public sectors? Where's the new jobs? The active travel budget is frozen. Is it 6 or 7 minutes, Presiding Officer? Oh, I do beg your pardon. Well, if you does me just for 2 minutes, please. Or 1 minute.
Try 30 seconds, Mr. Finnie.
Yes, thank you. We have the emergency. An emergency is a crisis, a disaster, a tragedy, a danger, a trauma. We've had warm words but unambitious targets, none of them suggesting there's a crisis at hand, none of them suggesting there's the disaster that's befallen our planet and our nation is being addressed, none acknowledging that we're already seeing tragic effects of increased extreme weather, none acknowledging that we are actually in danger if we don't address this forcefully, none acknowledging that we have to act in the trauma faced by our environment. The future generations are going to judge us on these words, not on these words, but on our actions. And sadly, the programme for government does not read like the response to a declared climate emergency. Thank you very much.